Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through Chow and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. One of my hobbies and one of the things that I'm actually pretty passionate about is barbecue. This last weekend, Friday, actually starting early Friday afternoon, I stuck on a pork butt and a chuck roast on my smoker, and from that I made barbacoa. Well, not really barbacoa, because barbacoa is made with beef cheeks, and my wife has a problem with that. And I also made carnitas from it. And the story behind it is that was for a meal that my wife and I were preparing for friends on Saturday. So it takes a long time in order to make these things. And this long history of smoking and creating barbecue is even longer than that. Goes way back. And to help us kind of understand a little bit about barbecue and its long history, and actually some of the players within it that are neglected, is a person who I've come to respect, and I love his work. His name is Adrian Miller. Adrian is the author of a book called Black Smoke. He also is the author of several other books, and many of them on soul food, on black chefs, and other folks who are sometimes overlooked. So, Adrian, welcome to Encounter. Let me ask you this question: How did you come to be a writer on soul food? Like, what is it that drew you to it, and how does barbecue fit into that?
Good to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity to share my story. So the short answer to your question is unemployment. The longer answer is I was working in the Clinton White House on something called the Initiative for One America, which was a racial reconciliation effort and also religious and ethnic reconciliation. And so that stint ended in 2001, and I was trying to get back to Colorado to start my political career, because at that time in my life, I wanted to eventually run for office and represent Colorado in the U.S. Senate. But the job market was really slow. I was watching a lot of daytime television. I'm really embarrassed to tell you what shows. Jerry. So in the depth of my depravity, I said, I should read something. So I went to a local bookstore, and I'd always liked to cook. And I found this book called Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History by a guy named John Edgerton. And then that book, he wrote that the tribute to Black achievement in American cookery remains to be written. So he wrote those words in the late 80s. I'm reading it in 2001. So I thought, well, surely somebody's done it by now. And so I tracked him down and wrote him a fan email and said, I loved your book, Mr. Edgerton, but you wrote this one sentence. Do you still think this is true? And he said, for the most part, nobody's taken on the full story. So that one sentence is what really launched the journey. And so I wanted to write the comprehensive work. And because of the extensive contributions that African Americans have made to barbecue, that was going to be part of the story.
And so it gave birth really to at least two books, right?
Yeah, three books, because the first I decided, because at first I reached out to a lot of food writers, especially African American food writers. And they told me, hey, look, you're not going to find that much. This country's racist, and these stories have not been told. So, cobble together the best book that you can with the little information you're going to find. Now, I have to say that these writers did not know about this newfangled thing called the internet, or at least they didn't fully understand it.
Right.
And when I got on the internet, man, not only have these stories been told, but there was a copious amount of information. So I realized, hey, this is going to be a life's work to meet Mr. Edgerton's initial challenge. So let me just write about soul food because I'd never written a book before, had no idea how it would land, and I said, let me just write about soul food, see how that goes, and see where that leads. And the initial research that I did for soul food has been the basis for the two other books that I've written on Black chefs in the White House and barbecue, and will be my next book. Will on Black street food vendors will draw from that initial research.
And let's be let me toot your horn a little bit. I mean, the soul food book and the Black Smoke book both won James Beard Awards. Now, you want to tell people a little bit about James Beard and why that's an important part of the book itself?
Yeah, so James Beard himself was a noted authority on American food and a big cheerleader for American food. And so eventually in the late 80s or 90s, I can't remember exactly when it started, but they started the James Beard Foundation, and the awards from that foundation are the highest honors you can get in food writings. It's often called the Oscars of food writing, as well as restaurant and chefs. There's two
Yeah.
big components. There's a media component and there's a restaurant and chef component. And so, yeah, so that's the highest honor you can get. So to get that right off the bat with my soul food book was a huge blessing, unexpected. And then to get it again for the Black Smoke book was also great. I didn't get nominated for my second book on Black chefs in the White House called The President's Kitchen Cabinet, but that was nominated for an NAACP award, Image Award for Best Literary Nonfiction. And even though I didn't win, I got closer to a lifelong goal. I've always wanted to meet Halle Berry. And the year that I was nominated, she was one of the she was one of the presenters.
Wow. So you got to meet her then.
Well, no, I will just say this. The progress I made on that goal is that we were in the same building at the same time.
It's like me saying I'm 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon because I saw him in concert.
Yeah, yeah. Although I will say this, during the ceremony, there is a moment when she stumbles over her words, and that's the exact moment when our eyes met. Even though I was sitting way up in the balcony.
This is awesome. So let me ask you a question. So let's get back to Black Smoke, which is an amazing book. I have to say that I was really impressed with it, and I need people to know how I came on this book. I was in Memphis and I was visiting the National Civil Rights Museum, and at the end of walking through, the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King died, and then seeing the history of slavery and the history of civil rights, I come on the bookstore, and I'm walking through the bookstore, and I see this book called Black Smoke, and I have to pick it up. So I pick it up, and I'm like looking at it, seeing that it's a history book of African American cooks and pitmasters and barbecue, and I have to say that I was just hooked automatically, just because of both the situation. We're in Memphis. What a great place for a barbecue book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the National Civil Rights Museum, and Dr. King, who himself was a big connoisseur of barbecue. And so and then I find out that you're the executive director at the Colorado Council of Churches. So I had this weird connection of all of the parts of my life that I feel really passionate about, and you are there. And I have to say, that I've not only grown to love the book, but I've also really grown to respect the work that you're doing there in Colorado.
So I decided to have these profiles to anchor each chapter. And the idea was that the person's story would just reinforce the themes that I discussed in the introductory essay, essentially, that is the chapter. So, there's so many favorites. I'll pick out two. One is the story of Mary John, who was born Marie Jean. She was in French Arkansas, and eventually anglicized to Mary John when the British take over. So there's this newspaper article. There's only one article talking about her doing a barbecue on July 4th, 1840, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and it describes her as the superintendent of that barbecue, and that's the 19th century word for pitmaster.
Right.
So you've got this enslaved African American woman telling dudes what to do when it comes to barbecue. And later I find out as I do get more information on her that she was hired out to do barbecues up and down the Arkansas River Valley. And then she is able to buy her freedom from this money that she makes making barbecue. So it's just an extraordinary story. And then also it really contravenes this dude food narrative of barbecue.
Right.
Because in the Black community, Black women have been in barbecue from the earliest days, as Mary John's example shows. So this image in the media does not square with the Black experience in barbecue. So I love telling her story. And then when she dies in 1850, she is lauded like any high-end cook. I mean, there's a tinge of racism in there. I mean, it is actually 1850, but the accolades that are heaped upon her in that newspaper article, giving her name and everything, is just quite extraordinary. And then the other person I love is a guy named Columbus B. Hill. And I love him because he comes to Colorado. So he's born in Missouri about 1851, makes his way to Denver in the late 1870s. And then in the early 1880s, he's doing barbecues for thousands of people. And one of the most significant barbecues was one he did in 1898 for something we call it the Denver Stock Show. It's a big convention of people in livestock, and they do all kinds of business trading and all kinds of stuff. So he's hired to do a barbecue for 3,000 people, and it was supposed to be a VIP barbecue, but the word got out in town, so 30,000 people showed up for this 3,000 person VIP barbecue. It ends up being a riot that is reported across the country. And so he takes a hit unfairly, I think, in terms of his reputation. But this guy was extraordinary. And so through my efforts, I got him inducted into the American Royal Barbecue Hall of Fame. And I found his unmarked grave. And so I bought him a gravestone. And so in August, going to have a ceremony where we give this brother, a proper burial as one of the great barbecue men of the West.
That is pretty impressive. That's a really great story.
Yeah.
So one of the people that stuck out to me, a number of them stuck out to me, but one of them was old Arthur Watts.
Yeah.
Story, and the history of slavery and how it impacted barbecue was one that I thought was really interesting, from the perspective that that these cuts of meat we're talking about, like we're talking about briskets, generally briskets and big pieces of meat, or whole hogs, or any number of other things that are kind of hard for people to understand how to cook, because you're not really well graced in that. And yet a lot of the slaves had to use those cuts of meat in order to get nutrition from that, because that's all that they were given, and they had to learn how to prepare it. And I think that that's an important part of your book. I think that's something that we need to kind of talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so I will push back a little bit on that, because it's kind of a different narrative when it comes to barbecue. So with barbecue, it was whole animal cooking until the 20th century.
Right.
So the cuts of meat really don't emerge until barbecue moves from a rural context to a urban context.
Urban context.
Because it was hard to do the whole animal cooking. So the reason why African Americans get so strongly associated with barbecue is because it's labor intensive. Somebody had to clear the field where the barbecue was going to take place. Somebody had to dig the trench, couple feet deep, couple feet wide. Somebody had to chop down the trees to create the wood that would be put into that trench, set on fire until it's hardwood burning coals. Somebody had to butcher the animals, process them, and then cook them, sauce them, serve them, provide the entertainment afterwards, and clean everything up. So, preachers and politicians were the ones that figured out, hey, if I have barbecue and if I give it away for free, people might show up, hear me say some stuff.
And that was an interesting thing too, was how politicians were using it to wed, or to wed the Black community, and so they thought by throwing a barbecue they could get people there and then get their message out, and people would automatically start voting for them. And
Which
so,
didn't always happen.
well, yeah, I mean, that was the point of the book, is that, at times it worked, at times it didn't. And so what is it? Like, how do and then, and then there's the co-op, how the white community co-opted barbecue, to make it a white story instead of it being a black story. So that kind of makes a very awkward conversation, don't you think? I mean, it's
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's really not until the 1890s that you start to see white men really showing up in barbecue in large numbers. But they still relied on an all black workforce. So, but the thing was, the white men got all the credit, for the barbecue, even though they weren't the ones actually doing the work. So even with that dynamic, the idea that you gotta have a black person cooking this was still dominant, and it really was that way until you get to the late 1980s, early 1990s, when there's this strong interest in regional cooking traditions in the United States, and you've got this group called foodies, and they are people that are really interested in food. They've got some disposable income, and they're willing to travel for good food experiences. And they're asking two questions: what's barbecue, and where I get the good stuff?
right,
And the
right.
media that arises to cater to this group, that's when the Food Network starts. That's when you start to see more barbecue programming on PBS and other things. Um, in the early years, they would actually include a lot of African Americans, but as time went on, they started telling these barbecue stories without African Americans. So people who were new to barbecue, who knew no better, we're relying on these media outlets to curate where to go and who to follow, and where the good stuff's being made. And unfortunately, instead of really sharing the diverse story of barbecue, they just got basically a white version of it. So by the time you get to the early 2000s, you have a lot of barbecue shows, magazine articles, newspaper articles that are talking about barbecue and not even referencing African Americans,
My
which is
guest today.
nuts.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy to me that they didn't bring that in. My guest today is Adrian Miller, and we've been talking about his book Black Smoke, um, which is an amazing book. It's on African Americans in the United States of barbecue, is the way that it's described on the cover. It's a James Beard Book Award winner, and Adrian has agreed to be on Encounter and talk to us a little bit about his book. So thank you so much for being here. And I just want to ask again. Like this whole, like the old Arthur Watts. So going back to him, after reading your book, I decided to write away to the company, and I ended up getting the full line of Pitmaster seasonings and the spicy barbecue sauce, as well as the regular barbecue sauce, and I put them all together. But his particular story is the story of slavery. I mean, like his entire story is the story of slavery, and how it gave birth to this company and the book, and that kind of thing. You want to share that a little bit with us?
Yeah, so as a young man, his job as a little boy, I shouldn't even say young man, as a little boy, his job was to tend the fires at on the plantation where he was growing up. And so anybody who knows about barbecue knows that really the key aspect of it is fire management.
It is.
Yeah. And so, he got a skill that served him well in doing barbecues. And then over time, he was doing barbecues, and then even after emancipation, he was hired out to do barbecues in that era, in the area where he lived. And so, that is kind of, you see the connection to slavery. You see how black people become the go-to authorities in barbecue, and then you see how after emancipation they have a very marketable skill that is sought after in the communities where they live. And it's not only where they live, but a lot of these African American barbecue people were put on trains, boats, and stagecoaches to go bring barbecue to all these other parts of the country. And sometimes they would go to another place and they kind of liked it and said, well, why would I go back to the South after being
Right.
out here, places like Denver and other places? And so they would stay there and start barbecue traditions in those new places. So yeah, so his arc was really interesting. He lived to, I think, like 108 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. And he had a pet wolf, and it was just he was very active until the end of his life. It was just a freak accident is why he died. Something fell on him when he was doing a grocery run to a nearby town stuff. So he was just a really interesting guy. And I love old Arthur, also because his heirs take his legacy very seriously. They take every moment they can to share his story. They make good products. I love their sauces and spices. And Udell Watts the fourth is probably who you eventually spoke with if you spoke with somebody at the company. So I just think they're a great story. And so I was glad. I can't remember exactly how I came across that story, but I was so glad that uh, Udell Watts the fourth was so willing to share that story. And these are things that when you can connect with the heirs of a barbecue cook, you get the stories that you're never going to hear or see in a newspaper or a book or a magazine. This is family history that's passed down, and it's just rich.
It was an impressive story, and I really appreciated that part of the book. The other part of the book that I really loved too was the recipes that you brought out into the book and where those come from. Because one of the most telling parts of the book is where you're trying to talk about how do you get grandma's sauce recipe, and grandma doesn't want to give it, and even I think there was one person even on his dying deathbed who basically winked and said, "Figure it out yourself." It's kind of like,
Yeah, that was one of my all-time favorite stories. When the person that shared that told me that story, I was just cracking up. And I was like, it's so typical. Like, these cooks are just so spiteful. They just really don't want anybody else to get some shine. Um and and my thing is, okay, when you make a recipe, you bring something of yourself to it.
right,
And so there's just no one's gonna ever actually do it exactly the way you do it. It's gonna come close, maybe. But what's wrong with just saying, hey, that person got that recipe for me, and I'm the one that taught them what they can do. But these cooks, they always do. They don't tell you, or if they do tell you, they will leave something out on purpose, which I call a lesser P. And so that's it's just spiteful, man.
now the recipes that you did include in the book, were any of them like that, or
No, as far as I know, people told me everything. And some of these were from cookbooks or blogs, and so these were things that people had already put out. They had already shared the recipe. I saw them, so I don't think I have any recipes where I was trying to pry something out of somebody. Maybe just because I knew that the easier path was to find something already out there and just
right?
ask for get permission to reprint it.
Now, have you used that the barbecue sauce recipe that you included in the book?
I have not used it, but somebody else made it and I tasted it, so it was good. It's more of a vinegar. I think you're talking about the Daddy Bruce
Yeah, the
barbecue
Teddy
sauce.
Bruce
Yeah,
one. Yeah. Mm.
yeah. It's more of a Carolina kind of vibe because it's heavier on the vinegar. I'm more of a Kansas City kind of
Yeah.
tomato based sweet sauce kind of person, but it was good.
Now that's an interesting thing for people to hear too, because not everybody knows a lot of the controversy that kind of comes around barbecue currently, where you have the sauced versus the unsauced, and you have all these the depths of kind of I don't know even the word for it. It's kind of like throwing your nose up at the other side because they don't get it. You want to talk a little bit about that dichotomy and how that kind of
Yeah,
in the book?
sure. So from the earliest days, barbecue was sauce. So the earliest sauce was vinegar with some spices in it, maybe just red pepper. There was different approaches to this, and so that was used and that was doused over the meat as it cooked in order to keep it moist and prevent it from drying out. So barbecue has always been sauce. from the earlier states. So what changes is when you get to the 20th century, where you start doing this emphasis on smaller cuts, and then really in Central Texas, where technically they are smoking meat, not really barbecuing in the sense that we say it, because it's indirect heat. Now, look, I'm not going to roll up into Texas and say, "Hey, I want to." So from the smoking thing, then you get this idea like, well, you want to taste the smoke in the meat, you don't need to sauce it. And so as Texas style barbecue has become ascendant, the idea that barbecue should be unsauced has ascended as well. And that is counter to kind of Black aesthetic with barbecue, because in African American circles, it's assumed that you can cook the meat and the sauce is really your signature.
My guest today has been Adrian Miller, and we've been talking about his book, Black Smoke. Thank you so much for being on Encounter today, Adrian.
Thank you. It's fun to talk barbecue.
It's awesome. And for all of you, I pray that you would be good and gentle with each other and that you would have a great day. Thank you.
Welcome to the Broome County Council of Churches. I'm Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. Here we try to connect compassion with needs. We inspire hope with dignity. You'll find a lot of good places for you to connect with our community here, to be able to help our community of Broome County be a better place to live. We also try within all of our programs to maintain people's dignity and to allow the person who's volunteering to really connect well with the people that we're trying to serve, and that together we find that we become a better person. Our programs are CHOW. CHOW is our hunger relief program. Faith in Action Volunteers is a program that helps elderly people age 60 plus to maintain dignity and remain independent in their own home. We have Jail Ministry, helps people within jail maintain their religious connections, and then outside of jail it helps folks reduce recidivism. We have the hospital ministry, which too helps people within the hospital, but also connects ministries outside of the hospital with people who are in the hospital. In addition to that, we have Encounter, which is our TV show and our radio show. And then we also have Ramp It Up, which helps build wheelchair ramps for homebound people who need a little extra help to get outside of their house. It's a youth program. The youth build the wheelchair ramps with adult mentors. So there you go. That's what we're about here at the council.